and there are many such big ocean states, in a sense. How do they get access to information on DPI? How do they get involved in this debate? Because a lot of the DPI debate has, even in the UN process or the G20 process, has changedly been on the supply side, right? So it's India that builds DPI and purposely does it the best in terms of population scale, Singapore, Estonia, and then you have the philanthropists, the Gates Foundation, and a range of others. Then you've got those like World Bank, UNDP, but there's a lot of action on the supply side. So if you're speaking to representatives from big ocean states, how do they get access today? How do they find out more?
Absolutely, Rudra. Thank you for that question. And it's really important as we talk about the big ocean states that the aggregate population size, as Rudra, you mentioned, from a few countries is really 65 million, which is about a little less than or close to 1% of the global population. But what we also don't know is that the aggregate global emission contribution of these big ocean states is less than 1%. So, we really have to contextualize the conversation of digital public infrastructure in that context where, whether it's new technologies like artificial intelligence or data models that make digital public infrastructure more powerful, we need to think about what are the problems that digital public infrastructure can actually solve. And I want to share a few insights from the work that UNDP does across all the ocean states, maybe sharing 3 insights with you. One is that we are seeing island states become huge contributors of digital public goods, which sort of power the Lego blocks that I just spoke about. In the Caribbean, you have all the Caribbean countries implementing together a police case management system through standardizing data sharing models, through standardizing how information is visualized and so on. And what we really are starting to see is a better cross-border interaction between systems. And that makes a huge difference, especially in countries where there's a lot of cross-border movements and economies of scales to be seen. So they are just not recipients, but also contributors, Rudra. Secondly, there's a lot of excitement about digital public infrastructure because it is an opportunity to steer your own digital futures in the direction that you want it to go with your people, with your stakeholders in countries. And these are not just political statements. Digital public infrastructure ultimately is about a framework that combines governance, that combines markets, that combines technologies, and makes sure that you can build in inclusiveness, you can build in safeguards, and you can retain sovereignty of the foundational building blocks of your country so that you are not tied to any particular vendor nor to any particular company or so on. And thirdly, we're seeing great momentum, Rudra, towards this cross-border interoperability, whether it's the Pacific Island ministers meeting together to aspire to sort of one digital identity system or among the Caribbean states and so on. So really, I think the conversation, the resonance of digital public infrastructure is tremendous, but the question really is how can we as stakeholders work with them, co-create with them, and this is where I think the opportunities of really looking at some of the climate challenges, the biodiversity challenges is going to be critical for us to focus together on with our big ocean states, Rudra.
So, Keyzom, I'm going to take the liberty over here to say is that, if you're from a big ocean state, I think you got to connect with Keyzom's office if you want a little bit more information. So that's just straight out. For those in the room, I'm even going to point to Rachel and Ben from the UNDP team. For those virtually, sorry, can't help you right now. But if you want more information, because, our sense is this is not theoretical, right? This is empirical. It's been practiced at scale across the world. India's done this for 1.3 billion people. Estonia has done it for less than 2 million people. Singapore has done this in different ways. And I think as Keyzom said, there's a fundamental difference between a digital solution and a DPI framework. A digital solution is just a tech feature, right? So it's a tech feature. You want to get to the airport faster. You want to scan something. So I think there are some QR codes here for questions. That's a tech solution, right? And do please use the QR codes and populate my questions, both online and otherwise, right? But what we are proposing here is something quite different. And it's a new theory of change. So the grammar is different, right? Solutions have been around for ages, about 2 decades, right? Frameworks where you place governance, technology, markets, and community together to create what you may call the DPI framework is something altogether quite different. What does it allow you to do? Most importantly, it's a strategy of optionality, right? You have control over your digital destinies, right? You could be a country of 11,000, you could be a country of 11 million, or you could be a country of 100 million. DPI allows you to have essential control over essential sovereign digital assets. It could be ID, it could be payments, it could be a data exchange, it could be a carbon registry, it could be a consent aggregator, right? Now, that doesn't mean that this is publicly owned, right? Public in DPI stands for public interest, right? There's a lot of space. Earlier today, the ambassadors were talking about the role of the private sector. It's the private sector who's going to build this in different parts of the world. They'll follow some norms, they'll follow some rules, right? But private sector has a lot of space. And to be sustainable financially, right, you need the private sector to kind of do this in many different ways. But just keep in mind that the value proposition of DPI against what we call vendor locked-in systems, where you have very little control, it's based on open API, it's open access, and it gives you control. You have control over the infrastructure, right? Think of a road. You have control over the road. You have control over what's underneath the road. But all the stuff that's built on the road, it could be a toll, so you introduce a service charge. It could be a supermarket. It could be a hotel. It could be a cyber city. It could be a smart city complex. All that's private sector, right? They have a layer, but it's a layer on top, right? Private sector A has a layer. Private sector goes away. You're not worried. You got private sector B, C, D as well, right? So it accounts for redundancy. And as I said, this is not theoretical. This is not us coming up with conceptual glamour. This is happening. It's happened across India, right? And it happened across India and essentially got India to do financial inclusion in 6 years, which ordinarily would have taken 5 decades, right? On any estimation, no matter what math you choose, right? It's happened in Estonia. It's happening in Philippines. It's happening in Thailand. This is stuff that is not Star Wars. It's not difficult to access, especially for island states. And the one point I'll make is you may not want to do one island state at a time. And this is where clusters become important. So think about 39 SID states.
Yeah.
So Keyzom, if I can turn back to you, is end of the day, and to be practical, it's going to be difficult to get mobilization for a population of 11,000. But is there a different way to do it? Should we be thinking SIDS?
Absolutely. I mean, already the island states are a testimony to this cross-border collaboration. Antigua and Barbuda, for example, are the host of the SIDS data hub. There are, especially when it comes to early climate warning systems, one country does it for other countries. So, I mean, if you talk about collaboration and the collective decision-making and the collective power, this is where we see tremendous action, but also that need for economies of scale, because with that you have better negotiating power for procurement, you have better sort of results in terms of the impact that you want to see for your planet, for the planet and the surrounding environment and your people. So I think, Rudy, it's really about regional blocks coming together, and we're already seeing actions on that. The one thing that I will state, though, Rudy, is that it's important for everyone to remember that digital public infrastructure without the right governance can also have tremendous risk. I mean, you are probably all aware of surveillance states, data privacy losses, and so on, which is why, at least for the UN and certainly for the United Nations Development Programme, being part of the G20 process was extremely important, because it was not just about technology. Digital public infrastructure is not just going to be about technology, but a framework that encompasses governance. And to see the G20 under India's presidency really highlight that, even develop a framework, the G20 principles for digital public infrastructure, was, I thought, a tremendous win, not just for the presidency in terms of its leaders' declaration, but certainly the bloc of 20 countries, the induction of the African Union in the G20, and all the guest countries that came from countries like Mauritius to Nigeria who participated in this process. It really was, or it felt like, sort of convening where you have sort of equality among sovereign countries participating in a very important dialogue of the future.
I'm going to come to a question on financing, and then we can talk a little bit on deployment, because we just wanted to give you a real sense of how do you do this. But if you have any questions, please use the QR code. If you're online, please add your questions on YouTube, and I can pick them up. Big question on financing, right? For almost every island state. We heard it this morning as well. Keyzom, give us a sense of how do island states access financing to essentially build DPIs, right? So let's break it down. It's one avenue would be your multilateral banks, right? And multilateral banks, end of the day, it's a bank, right? So they may give you access to finance, and sometimes they may do it on grant, but otherwise there's an interest, etc., right? This is an area on DPI where philanthropy seems to be really opening up, right? Yesterday, the CEO of the Patrick McGovern Foundation made a pledge on stage saying, I'm going to put $75 million into this space, right? And as global DPI champion Nandan Nilikani often says, is that this is stuff that doesn't need deep pockets, you need deep conviction, right? So you're talking about $10 per head. That's the cost of essentially building out ID and payments, right? Calculate that into 11,000, calculate that into 20,000, it's peanuts. Let's face it, right? How do island states access philanthropy for DPI?
Well, Minister Sina Lawson of Togo yesterday said it. She said, firstly, your own national budgets. And as Rudra says, it's not expensive. It really is a mindset. It's really more about the mindset change, because there's money already being invested in health system strengthening, on social protection system strengthening, or education system strengthening. How do you create ecosystem-based approach to these projects that already exist? And I think that is where our ability to listen and work with the island states is going to be really important, because many of our development organizations or philanthropies or different bilateral stakeholders will come with, sort of must do this, buy this and this. And, I think it's about sort of giving the power back and really engaging in deep listening. Secondly, of course, with the multilateral development banks, there are also catalytic funding that philanthropies as well as the UN agencies can invest in creating that right whole of government coordination, the right strategy or the thinking of that mindset change that is then better able to coordinate and sort of communicate across these siloed, disparate projects. And then lastly, an example really of the inequalities that exist in the world that the digital public infrastructure approach can solve is just in carbon trading. I mean, we know that, we could really, the main bottleneck to accessing climate finance in carbon markets is the convoluted and the costly process of carbon credit verification. If there was a digital public infrastructure approach that made it easier, and this is most acutely felt by countries in the global south, countries that are island states. And if we could sort of make that easier, make that minimal building block or the Lego block to solve this, expensive verification process, I believe that that's one way of accessing financing for digital public infrastructure.
No, thanks, Keyzom. And look, if you're island states, I think power is in collection. It's not necessarily in numbers. I'm just going to make the pitch is work together, create a proposal, organize yourselves. This is the best time for DPI financing. So from discovery to inquiry to figuring out what this stuff is, how does it give you control, how do you maintain data sovereignty, how do you maintain protections, cyber, there's an entire ecosystem that can help you with that. And maybe the UNDP and the digital office specifically in the UNDP, I should say, is a good place to start. There are a lot of questions on how do you deploy this, there are a lot of questions on data sovereignty here, and then there's one on, well, there are two on climate, and why is this important? So maybe I can take the one on deployment, and then as we finish up, Keyzom, you can maybe give us a slightly thicker answer on DPI and climate resilience. Just on the deployment question is, there are traditional ways of doing digital public infrastructure, right? Classic way one, you do big country, big infrastructure push, $100 million lines of credit, loans from banks, put out an RFP, a bunch of MSMEs, system integrators, bid for the project. They want to buy land, build data centers. The whole process is going to take about 2.5 years. It's a high friction process. And maybe for large population states, that's still the way to go, right? But if you're big ocean states, and if you've got an aggregate population of 30, 40 million people, we think there's a different way of doing this. And there's some serious detailing on this. Earlier today, the two ambassadors spoke about low state capacity, right? You don't have state capacity to receive people. You're not going to have state capacity to run 5 RFPs and procurements. It's just going to be very hard, right? Some of the work that we've been doing essentially looks at what's called the managed services provider model, which is a fully hosted, cloud-based offering to countries with a population of less than 5 million. This is a bit theoretical at the moment, but our sense is for island states, what you're really looking for is not the example of Indonesia, India, Egypt, or Malaysia. That's the bad example for you, right? What you're looking for is a plug-and-play model, right? So how do you download DPI like you download Gmail or Microsoft Word, customize it to your needs, customize it to your regulatory infrastructure? So you got a top-level download, and then you've got a lot of local contextual setting, right? And then adoption and implementation. And then you compress the two. Our sense it can be done in 6 months, right? If you're serious, if you come together saying, look, 40 million people, these are the 30 countries, this is the solution we want. And when I say us, we're policy wonks. So our idea is, what we do is try and put this together. It'll require a lot more detailing, but our sense is this is possible. It's the world we're living in. Last question before we leave. Crucial one for island states. How does DPI help to build climate resilience?
An amazing question, and one that we would love to end with. Over the last 7 months or so, we've been asking this question, working and looking at what is happening in island states, and of course, a few other countries as well. Yesterday, a global digital public infrastructure champion and a really committed soul to this, Mr. Nandan Nilekani and UNDP and a bunch of partners set out 5 ideas, 5 directional ideas, and do visit our website to read about it. We're happy to share with Carnegie India as well. Carnegie for this event as well.
That's okay, we're all together.
But one idea is the smart energy networks. Think of a unified energy interface. It's like an email system of energy, and just like different email providers have same sort of standard approach to sort of receiving and sending messages, if there was a unified energy system with open source protocol that could manage stored energy resources, communities could manage and share, users and producers could manage and share real time, and a whole bunch of innovations on top of it. This is a real opportunity in island states, of course, but relevant for across the world. Yeah.
No, Keyzom, thanks a lot. There's a lot more in the DPI space. The idea today was to snatch some time in this amazing dialogue to just kind of provide you with the tip of the iceberg. Do connect with us. We do believe that that DPIs can be transformational, not only in big population states, but certainly for island states. But Keyzom, thanks a lot for taking the time. It's a busy week for you. Thank you, everybody. Just to announce, we now have the president of Sri Lanka in 15 minutes, here to give a big keynote. Could I please ask everyone sitting in the first 2 rows to clear out? I think that's a security protocol. There's some time for tea and coffee, and then do come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much.